Hi, friends. We're back again just to do a quick review of the class and then also introduce the UN and what that means in our world. First, just an overview. A lot of this class is going to boil down to three things: geography, history, and current events. As we go through the class, we're going to be talking about geography, looking at maps, how they work, how to label them, how to read them, that kind of stuff. And we will go region by region around the world. That also applies to the history. As we go around the world, we will not only talk about the geography and talk about how things are interrelated physically, but also the history, and then that leads us into the current events as we go around the world. Again, the current events that are happening now often have historical ties and historical um, precedents. So anyways, on to the lecture for today. And now you probably have noticed now we're in week 5 or week 4, excuse me. And I don't do a lot of lectures like this. I tend to try to limit them. Unfortunately, this topic, and there's a few as we go along that'll require me to do a video like this. The United Nations actually has 2 videos that's coming out. We're going to do this one, and then the next, as you slide down a little ways, you got a second one. I apologize. I'm going to try to go fast. And if you need to stop and take a break from me, that's one of the great parts of having distance learning or having lectures on the web. You can pause me and go get a drink or whatever you need to do. All right, so on to the United Nations. Here's the flag, here's the emblem. You've probably seen them, maybe you haven't, but if you have, it looks pretty recognizable. So you've got the laurel around the outside, and then you've got a different projection of the world map. So as you can see, there's Africa and Asia and North and South America. There's the UN building. It's actually housed in New York City. You may know that, may not. I will provide the links for the Google Earth view. It's kind of neat. It's kind of a neat area. It's right on the East River in New York. Um, I'd encourage you to do that. It's not required. The Wikipedia, same thing. If you want to look in, dig a little bit more. It's got an interesting history on the building. It's got an interesting history on what goes on around the building. It's actually a sovereign territory, which is kind of neat, which means it's not part of the U.S., even though it's technically in New York City. It's not necessarily a part of the U.S. It's not a part of the state of New York. It's a international sovereign area. All right, so the UN, established in 1945, it was designed to replace the League of Nations. Woodrow Wilson had 14 points um, as one of those points was the League of Nations to end all wars because of the World War I was so horrific. Um, they really wanted things to not happen again. Now, the main purpose, and I had a little typo, is actually not to prevent World War II, it's to prevent World War III. And that is why the UN exists. It's an organization that includes a broad range of issues, but basically it's bringing all the world governments together in one entity to work things out so that there's a peaceful resolution to whatever problem might be presented. All right, so what's those broad range of issues? You can probably guess, but here's 12 of the highlights. The environment. So there's a Paris Accord that you've probably heard that we, as the United States, stepped out of. That was an environmental protection, refugee protection, disaster relief, counterterrorism, disarmament. That's making agreements to reduce the guns, tanks, airplanes, that kind of stuff. Non-proliferation, that's probably one that you might not be aware of. That is actually talking about nuclear weapons. So hopefully nuclear, I said that a little bit weirdly. Um, Non-proliferation is about nuclear weapons. So basically, when the UN started in 1945, and they really have tried to stop the spread of nuclear weapons. Uh, Promoting democracy, typo, interesting. Apparently, my typing skills weren't very good yesterday. Human rights, gender equity, international health, clearing landmines, which actually is a very big issue in places like Africa, uh, Kosovo, places like that, and also expanding food production. We have a pretty big population in the world, and there are lots of people in the world that don't have enough food. So one of the UN's issues that they work on is expanding our ability to make food. All right. So it's based on its charter. All nations agree to the charter when they join. So it's not a legally binding agreement, but they do have to agree to the charter. The UN has 193 nations as members. The newest member was South Sudan. That was about a decade ago. They're also the most recent country to be formed. Non-UN members include Vatican City, which is the Catholic city-state. Taiwan and Kosovo are also not UN members, but those are a little bit different. Taiwan is not recognized by China, and because China is a member of a special part of the UN, that creates problems for other countries to recognize Taiwan and be a member of the UN. And that also applies to Kosovo, where there's some dispute about whether it has its own sovereignty, and so those are the main reasons why Taiwan and Kosovo aren't countries. Uh, just general information. Again, it's located in New York City. It's has an International Court of Justice, and that is the only piece of the UN that is not located in New York. So if you think about, and now the UN isn't a world government, it isn't, but if you thought of it, and it can apply itself, or it can lend itself to thinking of it like a world government, its judicial system is the Court of Justice, and that is located in The Hague in the Netherlands. Again, all members are sovereign and can retain control of their country. The UN is not a world government. I can't stress that enough. It is not a world government. They do not pass laws. What they do is they pass resolutions that are meant to set a standard. So again, I'm going to reference Paris Accord. It was basically a group of rules that they wanted everybody to follow, and everybody agreed to follow them to limit the environmental impact of their countries. Um, so again, we were able to step out of them, and we meaning the United States, and we are not a member of that particular accord. Now, an accord is just an agreement. Now, they do, however, pass treaties, which are legally binding contracts, I guess would one way to put it, between countries. So, and it can involve more than one country. Um, think of trade agreements, things like that. Or obviously, when you hear the word treaties, a lot of people say peace treaties or think of peace treaties. All right, so we talked about the judicial branch a little bit as far as introducing it and as the Court of Justice in The Hague. There's one piece that we're going to talk about in this video before we leave you. It's called the General Assembly. So it is, again, if you thought of it as branches, this would be the legislative branch. And it's kind of talked about as the Parliament of Nations, and every nation has representation. So in this General Assembly, they have a seat and they have a single vote, no matter the size, wealth of the country. Now, some people disagree with that because obviously, think of China, that has a lot more people. India has a lot more people. Even America has quite a few people. When you compare it to Iceland or some other, Luxembourg, whatever it might be. Now, so there is something to that, but there's also structures within the UN that give those countries a little bit more power, I guess would be the way to put it. Now, again, if you vote, it carries the weight of world opinion, but it's not legally binding. So again, it's more resolutions, not laws. All right, so here's what the General Assembly looks. As you can see on the top left, that's the assembly empty. On the bottom left is, I believe that's from President Trump's presentation to the General Assembly. It's tradition that at about once a year, the President of the United States makes a speech to the General Assembly. It's not required. It's just kind of a tradition. I believe it is usually in October-ish, somewhere in there. Little interesting quirk. It's a very big, large area, as you can see, holds 193 members. Usually each member has their own table or at least a couple of spots in that assembly. And then if you can see in the top left, there's a ring, open ring above there. And a little quirk is that that's usually where the interpreters sit. So not everybody in the world speaks English. Not everybody in the world speaks, say, Spanish, right? So if there's a speech being given in English or in Spanish, there's often interpreters. And you'll see, if you ever see news coverage of the General Assembly, oftentimes they have a speaker or a headset, something like what I have, to listen to the interpretation of, or the translation of, that particular speech. And that's all I have. I hope that wasn't too painful. I do have one more video on the UN, and then we can hopefully discuss. Take care.